Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis. And today, this week, we're going to take another short break from the summer of the Bee Gees. I'm putting the final touches on stuff. Don't worry. Next week, I'm going to be going through my top 10 album tracks. The week after, I'm either going to be giving you my top 10 albums or I'm going to be ranking the whole slew. Haven't quite made up my mind on that. I'm going to have some sort of capstone on the end of this thing. It might be just a general, babble about the Bee Gees. It might be an actual, like a top 40, like I did for the Beatles. I haven't made up my mind yet, but there's going to be a capstone at the end of the summer of the Bee Gees. But before I get to that, while I'm putting the final touches on that stuff, I want to, he said, hitting his other camera. Before we get to that stuff, I want to go back several weeks ago, I don't know, at some point in the not too distant past, I put one of the heads up on my personal Mount Rushmore of songwriters. Randy Newman was the first head that I put up there. Love Randy Newman. And then a couple of weeks ago, I put the second head up there. And the second head up there was Neil Innes. And I told you when I put Neil Innes's head up on my personal Mount Rushmore of songwriters, I told you that I was going to be talking a lot about Neil Innes. I started my preaching the gospel about Neil Innes by ranking the albums of the Bonzo Dog Band. Today I'm going to give you my top 10 songs by the Rutles. Very quick history of the Rutles. The Rutles was a Beatle parody. It started on Rutland Weekend Television, the series that Neil Innes did with Eric Idle. They did a couple of sketches that were Ruttle themed on that. The first one, the big one, the one that actually started everything was the film that Neil made to go with the song that he wrote called I Must Be in Love. And he thought the song itself sounded kind of Beatley. He wasn't writing it as a Beatles song or as a Beatles parody or anything like that. But when he was done with it, he thought it sounded kind of Beatley. Kind of Beatley, by the way, is how he describes it. That's not I can't take credit for that phrase. And so since it sounded kind of Beatley, he thought, okay, well, I can make a quick video for this that will be a parody of the scene in Hard Day's Night when they're running around, chasing each other around in the field, right? They're doing their little dances and all that sort of stuff while Can't Buy Me Love plays. And so he took a camera out and got some guys together, and they went out and they ran around in the field and they filmed it, and that became a sketch on Rutland Weekend Television. Eric Idle then took that film and showed it on Saturday Night Live some months later when he was the host of Saturday Night Live that week. And it was popular enough that a special was commissioned featuring the Rutles. It was called All You Need Is Cash. It was written by Eric Idle, directed by Eric Idle and Gary Weiss. Gary Weiss was made a lot of films for Saturday Night Live, and had original music by Neil Innes. The show itself was not particularly popular. It was the lowest rated television show that week, if not that year. And I don't mean lowest at its time slot. It was the lowest rated TV show. It was a bomb. But the soundtrack album, when they released it, sold pretty well. And when home video became a thing, All You Need Is Cash became very popular. It became a cult hit. So much so that the original soundtrack, All You Need Is Cash, was released in 1978 when the show was done. I don't have a copy of that. The copy I have is of the reissue from 1990. Rhino Records reissued it, and there were several songs that appeared at least partially in the TV show that weren't included on that original soundtrack. A couple of them because they were just, I mean, there was barely a sliver played, and it wasn't worth taking up space on the record. Because remember, this, when it was originally done, it was done on vinyl, and real estate was precious. But they also left at least one off because they were afraid of copyright infringement suit. They had a parody of Get Back that they called Get Up and Go that's very close to Get Back. And so, it was, the list of songs was cold for the soundtrack. On this reissue, they're all back in there. Even the ones like Goose Step Mama and Blue Suede Schubert that you barely hear in the original special. Got them all here. And they were popular enough that 6 years later they got together and did a follow-up. This was called Archaeology, and it was a roughly inspired by the Beatles anthology. Got 20 more songs on here, so between these two, we've got 40 really good songs. And I'm gonna, out of those 40, I'm gonna give you my top 10 today. Before we get into that, first, this is the top 10, and top 10s are sponsored unofficially by Schofferhofer Beer. That's good beer. Secondly, the subjectivity notice. Artistic appreciation is, by definition, a subjective thing. There is no such thing as objectively good or objectively bad art. There is only art that I like and art that I do not like. And as long as we keep that in mind, this is a fun conversation. It's entertaining. It's instructive. Oh, nothing but happiness and sunshine. Until one or the other of us starts thinking in terms of being objectively right. And that's the point when everything breaks down and, we start hurling epithets at one another and flinging feces against the wall. So let's just avoid that. And just remember that this is, there's agree and disagree and like and don't like, not right and wrong. And then finally, before we get into the actual top 10, I do want to make one thing clear. If you're not super familiar with the Rutles, I'm surprised, because why else would you be watching this video? If you're not super familiar with the Rutles, one thing to keep in mind when you're listening to this music, Neil Innes is not trying to write Beatles parodies for the most part. Some of these songs, yes, they are Beatles parodies. Get Up and Go is a parody of Get Back. Love Life is a parody of All You Need Is Love. Sometimes I get the name of that one wrong. So yes, some of these are direct parodies of actual songs. Major Happy's up and coming Once Upon a Good Time Band. Pretty obvious what they're shooting for there. But for the most part, these were not songs that were written to be parodies of Beatles songs. They were written to be Neil Innes has said in interviews that when he got the assignment, when the budget was approved, and yes, they're going to do this. Eric Idle's working on the script, and Neil is working on writing these songs. As soon as he got to that point, he made the conscious decision. The first decision he made in the process was, I'm not going to listen to any Beatles songs. He did not want to do direct parodies of songs. What he wanted to do was write songs that tapped into a similar vein, a similar emotional vein that those Beatles songs did. So he was writing from the perspective of what he remembered as a fan listening to the songs when they came out the first time. And he was trying to write songs that spoke to that rather than trying to imitate the actual songs. Now, there are certain flourishes that crop up a lot. There's a lot of yeah, yeah, yeahs, for example. And so they are doing very fairly light Beatles parody on most of these songs. But the bulk of the parody comes not in the songwriting, but in the performance and in the production. Once he had finished writing all the songs and they were ready to start recording, then they went back and they were listening obsessively to Beatles songs, and they were trying their best to recreate that sound using the raw materials of these songs that he had written, that were similar in outlook, if not direct parodies of the actual songs. So, if you're looking for Weird Al Yankovic style parody, you're not going to find it here. At least not very much. 10-15% of the songs are going to scratch that itch. Everything else is parody in terms of style, not in terms of structure. It's one of the things I love about this music. It's one of the things I love about Neil Innes. He can do that. Okay, so let's get into my top 10. Now, I just realized one last thing. I'm talking about these two albums. There are two other albums out there. I do not have copies of these albums. I have, as part of my mission in life, that I want to get copies of these albums. They are difficult to get unless you're willing to pay big chunks of money, which I do not have. So, if a helpful viewer out there wants to buy me one of these. One of them is Live and Raw, which came out in 2014, and as you can tell from the title, it's a live album. The other came out in 2018, and it is the Wheat album. I love that. The Wheat album mostly comprises demos that were done that were later polished up for the Archaeology album. So neither one of these albums has anything in it that these two albums don't have. So it's not like we're missing content. We're just missing alternative versions and stuff like that. So, okay, we're ready for the top 10? Of course we are. Coming in at number 10, off of the original album, we've got this is one of the few that's a direct parody, and it's their parody of I Am the Walrus, and it is, of course, Piggy in the Middle. Cat in the fiddle. Hey diddle diddle, cat in the fiddle, piggy in the middle, do a poo poo. I love that song. Number 10, Piggy in the Middle. Coming in at number 9, an homage to If I Fell. It's not really a parody of it, but the song is set up in the same way. It's got the same kind of harmony, and that is off of the original With a Girl Like You, which I just think is a nifty pop song. I like With a Girl Like You. It's wonderful. Coming in at number 8, one of the songs off of Archaeology, and it is Joe Public. Joe Public is one of those that doesn't really sound like a Beatles song. Several of the songs on Archaeology don't have much of a strong connection to Beatles songs. There will be flourishes. There will be one point where there's a strong piano chord, for example, that really, that sounds like, it's going to be that kind of thing. But Joe Public is just a great, balls out rocker. I love Joe Public. Coming in at number 7, also off Archaeology, is the Knicker Elastic King. I love the Knicker Elastic King. In the late 70s, early 80s, I think the first series was 79, and then 80 and 81, or 81 and 82. I don't know if they were in consecutive years or not. Neil Innes had a show on British television called Innes Book of Records that was a video show. He was doing, in essence, a weekly video album. Half-hour long, so there's 5 or 6 songs, and he's doing videos for the different songs. Sometimes they are loosely connected in subject matter, but it's mostly just him doing videos for his songs. We're going to talk more about this in a few weeks. But he's got a version of Knicker Elastic King on that as well. Knicker Elastic King is a wonderfully complicated and just fun song about a man who makes his fortune selling elastic bands for underwear until the bottom fell out. I love it. Coming in at number 6, also off of Archaeology. Number 6 is a song called Questionnaire. Out of all of these songs, there are a handful that I do in my regular sets when I perform, when I play live around town. Questionnaire is one of those songs. It's a great little song. Works well for acoustic solo guitar. I love Questionnaire. Okay, number 5, we are back to the original Rutles. And this is their version of Penny Lane. It's called Doubleback Alley. And it's a pretty good parody of Penny Lane. Number 4, we've got a song called Another Day. Another Day is not really, I don't think it's really a parody of any individual Beatles song. You know, they're not riffing on any song. But the piano itself is arranged and recorded in such a way that's strongly reminiscent of Martha, My Dear, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I like it as much as I do. It sounds a lot like Martha, My Dear. So, Another Day. Great song. Number 3, we are back to archaeology. And number 3, we've got Eine Kleine Klasse Musik. I just like saying Eine Kleine Klasse Musik. That's another one of those that was originally part of the Innes Book of Records that he reworked for consumption on a Rutles album. And so, yeah, we will be talking about that again when we talk about the Innes Book of Records. It's also one that I like to perform. The problem is I can't do Questionnaire and Eine Kleine Klasse Musik too closely together because the way I perform them, the key that I do them in, they have a it's not quite the same chord progression, but it is extremely close. And so it sounds like the same song the way I do them. But it's, that's beside the point. Eine Kleine Klasse Musik. Great song. Okay, number 2. I have always thought when the world was unkind, cheese and onions. Do I have to spell it out? CHEESEANDONIONS. Oh, no. Cheese and onions. I love cheese and onions. Neil Innes tells the story. I've seen him do it in a couple of different interviews. If he ever gets the question, what did the Beatles think of the Rutles? He says, well, George supported it. George was in the special. George gave them access to a lot of the footage that later was used in their anthology series. George was fully on board. Ringo didn't care much for it, but didn't really care one way or the other. Paul was a little bit miffed because he was out doing press for a recent album of his when the special aired, and so it was something that he was asked a lot about at the time when he wanted to be talking about his album. John Lennon was the interesting one because he says that he saw John Lennon, met him on the street. He was like, "Oh, John, there you are. What did you think of the? What'd you think of the special?" And John Lennon's reply was, "Cheese and onions." Great song. But my favorite song, my favorite Rutles song off of the original, the one that started it all, and that is I Must Be in Love. It's not a Beatles parody. It's just a good, jangly, mid-60s sounding pop tune. It would be a good power pop tune. It would be a song that would just be tailor-made for the Knack in the late 70s, early 80s, or Fountains of Wayne in the early 2000s. It's just a nifty little power pop tune, nifty little jangly pop tune. I love I Must Be in Love. So, those are my top 10 Rutles songs. Which ones do you prefer? Drop a note down below. Make your argument for one of the other songs. There's 40 songs on these two albums combined, and I can make a good argument for all 40 of them to be in this list. So I'd be interested in your arguments as well. Thank you very much for sticking it out this long. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, and I assume you do if you're sticking it out this long, click the like button. I'd appreciate that. Go ahead and subscribe while you're at it and click the bell icon for notifications. I would appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope that the rest of your day is cheery. See you soon.